In this video from the Fertility Alliance this evening, we're going to be talking to Kat about her experiences of fertility counselling. Kat, when did you first consider fertility counselling? I know it's something that not everyone thinks they want to do when they're going through treatment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think everybody does consider it. Do you mean the fertility specific counselling or counselling in general going through the treatment?
Just any counselling.
So there's just a few moments that I remember because it was a very long journey. It was around about 7 years, our journey. And I remember going to the doctors to see my GP when we were probably about 2 years, 2.5 years into the process. And I just wasn't feeling right. I wasn't feeling myself. And we went through everything. And I had what I now recognize as a very wise and very empathetic GP who said, I don't think you were depressed, but I do think you are struggling just to cope with the challenges that life are throwing at you at the moment. And I really would advise some talking therapy would be the best thing if you feel you want it. And she did actually say, I could refer you on the NHS, but you've got about a year's waiting list, by which point you might already be in treatment anyway, and it's only 6 sessions. So if you can afford it, I would advise paying privately. And luckily we could afford it. So we did sort of go down that private route. But at the time, I didn't know about fertility specific counselling. So I just Googled and found sort of it's not a company, it's more of it was a building nearby that counsellors rented rooms at, and I had some counselling. And to this day, I don't know if it helped me or didn't help me. It was very generic. And I was very happy to stop it. Whereas I think with my fertility counselling, I was never happy to stop it because it just was so helpful. So yes, that was when I first considered the first bit of counselling. And then another moment I remember seeing a leaflet at the fertility clinic when I was having a meeting. And it just said on it, it wasn't given to me, it was on the stand at the fertility clinic. It just said, are you struggling? Ask us, we can give you links to counsellors. But I still felt at the time a little bit of stigma around the idea of having a counsellor. And I thought, oh no, I shouldn't ask. They'll think I'm weak. So I never asked. Yeah, and I think had they have asked me, it might be a different response. So that was the second time. And then the third time was the compulsory counselling. So my husband and I conceived our children via donor conception. And in order to be able to sort of join the donor embryo program, which is what we used, there was some compulsory implications counselling. And it was that counselling that sort of was the counselling that really made the impact. We had such a great rapport with our counsellor. And she was just so knowledgeable about the fertility world, and it just clicked and just really, really helped.
So before that, when you saw the leaflet in the clinic, they didn't
Mm.
actually ever offer you counselling. They didn't ever talk
Never.
about it.
No, and I think that's a missing link really. And I've probably thought about this a little bit too much since then, but I always wonder why on earth don't the consultants or the nurses, when you're going through something so hard and they know it's so hard, but why don't they mention counselling? And I don't know whether there's something to the is there something to the fact that they can't offer it for free. So that's why they don't offer it. But then they're offering other add-ons. So yeah, I still don't know why it's not, or unless it's sort of an education or lack of education for the consultants and fertility nurses around really how difficult it is and how counselling actually can just help keep you on track, I suppose, during the process.
You were talking earlier about how you felt the clinic might see you if you said you want counselling. I mean, did you have
Mm.
kind of preconceptions about what going to see a counsellor was
I
about?
had a lot of preconceptions. I think actually, without wanting to sound like it was a life epiphany, before going through fertility treatment, I had preconceived ideas about going to a counsellor. It was okay for everybody else to go to a counsellor. I understood that, but I never thought I would be the person to go to counselling, which says a lot in itself, I think, about my mindset. Um, and even when I was going through the treatment, I think one of the things, so I split my treatment into two halves, the half before I had my first child and the half before I had my second child. And going through the process in the first half, I kept congratulating myself on the fact that I hadn't needed a counsellor. When actually looking back, I really did need a counsellor. I used other coping mechanisms like working too much instead. Um, and I don't think there anything really is to celebrate about not going to a counsellor because it could have helped me. But at the time, I thought I was, I suppose, looking for ways to see myself as successful because I wasn't achieving a pregnancy.
People are often a bit anxious, I think, about what's actually going to happen in a counselling session. Can you tell us
Mm.
just a little bit about that?
I can, yes. I think one of the sort of stigmas, I suppose, around cancer is that people think it's going to go back to your childhood and find a problem with your childhood or find a problem with how you were parented. And people get quite defensive about that or don't feel like they're ready to do that. And there are some models of therapy that do that. I think if you're looking at trauma or you're looking at, abuse or something like that. But if you're looking at a specific life event and support for the life event, it is absolutely nothing like that. It was eye-opening to me, really, because it was more of a chat with a, a not a friend, but sort of a confident ally in a way. A chat about the things we were going through, and it flitted for us because it was implications counselling to start with. It flitted between, it never is advice, but it flitted between somebody who was knowledgeable around the legalities or around the research around donor conception and donor conceived children. So how the children, the potential children, might feel once they were conceived, and like help really probing us to think of the differences between how we were thinking now as non-parents or sort of wanting to be parents, and how we might think differently when the child was born. And all of that really helped us, I believe, really helped us with our parenting once we had our children, and our parenting around the donor conception side of things. So that was one side, and the other side of it was when treatment maybe wasn't going the way we expected it to, or there were delays, or there were other things that we were just either stuck with or finding difficult with. The therapy really helped there because it was in the now. So it was looking at, how do you feel now? What is that feeling? How can you explore that feeling, and how can you come to a conclusion about it? We did a mixture of couples therapy together when we're looking at certain issues through the process, and then individual therapy for myself. And I suppose how the therapy ran was different depending on what stage we were at. We had quite a few miscarriages in between our two children, and the therapy was very useful in helping us sort of make decisions around whether we should carry on, whether we should stop, where we were heading with our life. Because obviously once you're in the IVF world, your life comes to a standstill a little bit. So there was a lot of help around that, but never ever did it go into that sort of modality of looking backwards.
It sounds to me, from what you're saying, as if it really made a difference seeing a specialist fertility counsellor rather than just the general counselling that you had at the beginning. Is that true?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it really, really helped. I think the knowledge for the first part, the fact that we were able to focus in on the fertility, whereas I think when I saw the general counsellor, we were flitting from one thing to the other thing. She was trying to go backwards and look at things that might make me feel like I was feeling right now, and I didn't understand myself enough at the time to know that actually what I was feeling was circumstantial. And yes, there sometimes can be lasting impacts of IVF afterwards, but I would still class that as circumstantial rather than sort of a past trauma or a hormonal imbalance. It was very much to do with what was going on there and then. So was that. And I think once we met our counsellor and built that rapport and really had that relationship with her, it helped us to feel less alone. Because I think fertility treatment and the IVF procedure can be a very lonely place for many reasons. In terms of feel that the way you feel you're different to your peers, you're different to the people you work with. There's lots of life that you feel maybe shut off from. But by having that sort of third person who understood what we were going through, because at the time as well, we didn't really know anybody else who was doing fertility treatment. That's different now, but at the time we didn't. So that was really, really beneficial.
And finally, I think a lot of people feel like you did maybe at the beginning, a slight reluctance to be the sort of person who sees a counsellor. I mean, what would you say to someone else who's going through treatment now in terms of advice about whether they should consider it or not?
I would say you are already doing what you never thought you would do in your life by having assistance in whichever way it is to have your child. So your life path is already not how you expected. And I imagine your perception of yourself is already different anyway. So open your mind and try the counselling. And I do appreciate that. Obviously, there's a cost implication there as well. But I think when we really are really trying to conceive and we'll do anything to bring home that baby, we will throw money at things like acupuncture or reflexology or other things to help. And obviously there's no research whether that helps or not. I did some of that myself. But that investment in counselling is an investment in yourself, and it's not just an investment in yourself and getting through the treatment. It's actually, I believe, also an investment in the parent you will become. And having had the counselling, I'm now a huge advocate for what I would call preventative counselling. So sort of, I still touch base with our counsellor about every 2 months, just to check in, see if there's anything that, I think because of the donor conception element as well, just to check in that there's nothing that might have come up or triggered me or made me consider something. And I genuinely believe that by having that support, and also knowing that if something is challenging in my life, I can call our fertility counsellor. But having that sort of preventative, I think, helps me not feel bad about things. So, for instance, in between the two children, even if we weren't doing IVF, I still attended sessions, and I do believe that helped me cope with the treatment when it finally arrived.
Thank you so much, Kat. Thank you for telling us your story. It's been really, really helpful, and I'm sure a lot of people will find that really incredibly useful, and maybe it will encourage them to think about something they might not have thought about before.